Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile 1 discussion. The Legacy of Phrecia event, just a couple of days away now, and Grinding Gear Games have put out what might be the last updates in terms of information prior to the release of the event. So, information about the way that things are going to run, information about the idol system, but also a couple of little changes to what's been announced so far. On top of that, yesterday they also put out a teaser for all of the small nodes that are associated with every single Ascendancy. We'll get to that in a sec. Some of them are better than we'd hoped, some of them are worse than we'd hoped, particularly the Surfcaster. Now, this is not enough to dampen my enthusiasm in the Surfcaster Ascendancy. I still think it's really good, but there is definitely more power in some of the others here than was previously announced. Let's start with the news about idols, however. Firstly, there is going to be a way that you can upgrade the black market that Faustus has, and this is going to allow you to turn gold into random idols. I don't think this is going to be really important unless this ends up just being better than you might expect it to be. Like, for instance, if Grinding Gear Games have decided to make it so that this biases towards getting rarer idol mods, and if some of the rarest idol mods are so rare that this becomes the only practical way to get them. Where I think the target audience might be here is the people who spend a lot of time in white and yellow tier maps and end up getting their character quite high level and manage to get the substantial amount of gold you need in order to unlock this feature. Those players might find that this is a good way to get higher item level idols than they can get from the content that they're doing. Now, this won't affect veteran players very much because we tend to rush to tier 16 maps in PathOfExile 1 and not really spend all that much time in the white and yellow tier maps except for the ones that we have to do. But for people who are a bit newer, this will be something that helps them catch up. Note that 100,000 gold is no small amount, but it's also not an oppressively large amount either. That's going to take an hour and a half or 2 hours of dedicated farming for a rookie player that's in yellow maps, and it's only going to be faster if you're a veteran player that's in tier 16s, especially if you're familiar with using scarabs, or potentially even tier 17 maps. Then it will be faster again. You might be able to do this in 3 maps or even in 2. It also requires Phrecia metal, which is something that requires you to be quite a long way through your setup of Kingsmarch in order to be able to smelt at all. So keep that in mind. It's not going to be a quick unlock, but it is going to be a worthwhile one. All that said, this doesn't change some of the previous things I've said about getting your town set up. I still think you want to rush to mining 11 and get that before you get the ability to unlock the black market upgrade. And this is what the black market interface looks like. Unfortunately, we don't know how much gold it's going to cost in order to gamble for these idols, but it's probably going to be an appreciable but not oppressive amount. Now, there is going to be a 3-for-1 vendor recipe for magic idols and also for rare idols. Here you can see it in play for the Conqueror idol, which is the 2x2 one. You can turn in 3 of them in order to get one unidentified one back. Normally, this will be the item level of the lowest of the input idols, so I'd expect that that continues to be the case unless Grinding Gear Games have decided to make an unusual exception here. Now, this is a way to recycle idols that have terrible mods, and it's going to be particularly useful when it comes up to the next thing here, which is that Isla is going to allow you to recombinate idols. This is going to be a very, very, very important thing, especially if it turns out, and I think most of us expect this will be the case, that some of the individual modifiers are quite rare. If you get one of the rare modifiers, but everything else on that idol is trash, then Isla can then give you a second chance at maybe being able to pull that off onto something better and end up with a better overall idol as a result. Additionally, this should allow magic idols to have some use. If you get a magic idol that's got 2 mods on it, then using the Recombinator with something else that's got 2 mods gives you a slim chance of getting a perfect 4-mod idol, and I think that that will be something a lot of people will be experimenting with. Now, there are also some brand new unique idols. We don't know all of the details of these, but Twisted Wish here gives you a bit of an example of some of the things they're going for. Firstly, you'll notice 2% increased maps found in area. There's 8% on the 2x2 idol. So it looks like every idol square you're able to use is going to be 2% of this stat. And that's going to end up with something like 60% to start with, scaling up to more like 84% when you unlock absolutely everything. And what this allows you to do is customize the drops that you get from Ultimatum somewhat. Interestingly though, Ultimatum rewards, as far as I'm aware, cannot be fossils. Or if they can be fossils, they're staggeringly rare. So there's a couple of things here that don't show up as Ultimatum rewards, but that are listed as excluded. Maybe this means that this system is going to change some of those rewards, or maybe it is possible to get fossils, they're just crazy rare, and this is going to make them even rarer again. Twisted Wish looks like it'll have a lot of different versions that are available of it, and it'll be interesting to see exactly what you can get from this. Okay, so that's the information that was announced today. Let's go into what was announced yesterday. These are the small Ascendancy nodes. To start with, we have the Scavenger and the Aristocrat. Both of these, every single small node gives you one classic tree passive skill point, which is a pretty good effect. The Paladin, however, is something else. This is amazing. Regenerate 0.5% of life per second, 5% increased effect of non-curse auras from your skills. This one is absolutely phenomenal. This is going to be 20% increased effect of non-curse auras, which is probably worth an Ascendancy node, or if it's not worth an Ascendancy node, it's not far off it. And there's definitely going to be builds where it is unconditionally worth that. So this is one of the strongest ones that's around. The Gambler is the next Ascendancy node here. 10% increased evasion rating is a pretty mundane stat. You're always happy to see it, but it's never outstanding. Then we have 5% increased rarity of items found. So you're going to end up getting 20% of this across the entire setup of your character. There's actually quite a bit, but remember that rarity works differently in PathOfExile 1 to how it works in PathOfExile 2. In PathOfExile 2, rarity can upgrade currency items from more common currencies like the Regal Orb into rarer currencies like the Divine Orb. In PathOfExile 1, all it can do is upgrade scoured items to magic, magic items to rare, rare items to unique. It's not as powerful as it would be in PoE 2. Don't assess this as you would in PoE 2. All that said, it is a welcome little bonus. It means you'll leave each map with a few more unique items, and whether those items are scoured, normal, or magic, all the rest of them, they just stay on the ground anyway once you get rolling at endgame. The Gambler Ascendancy, though, it's really, really powerful. It's one of the best of these Ascendancies, and it's really flown under the radar. The ability to get lucky attack block in conjunction with a shield that provides life gain on block, and also to do this at the same time as having cap spell suppression. This is going to be something that's going to be a powerful defensive package, and you can do that at the same time as having a whole bunch of powerful offense in the Ascendancy, where you can invert monster resistances 50% of the time without the mastery that adds more of the same stat, 75% of the time with that mastery. That's going to be a phenomenal offensive package. It works better when you're mapping than it does against big bosses, and that's something to keep in mind. A lot of the time people optimize their character builds for bosses, but you don't actually spend very much time fighting bosses, and I'll tell you now that the ability to invert a monster's resistances 75% of the time is going to be absolutely massive when you're fighting a tier 17 map boss and you've clicked an Eater of Worlds altar that gives that boss plus 160% cold resistance. Suddenly, all the cold damage you're doing is going to be doing a lot more damage than it otherwise would. Next we have the Daughter of Oshabi. This has 10% increased effect of shrine buffs on you. This is a useful stat. It's something that is definitely thematically fits with the Daughter of Oshabi, and I think this is going to end up being a pretty good one of these small nodes. It also has 10% increased evasion rating, which is definitely valuable. The Whisperer has 10% increased attack damage and 6% increased maximum mana. This is fantastic, especially with the way that the Whisperer scales damage. This is one of the best of the whole lot. The Wildspeaker gets 3% increased movement speed per small Ascendancy node, which is one of the best stats in the game, and also gets minion damage, which will work for many of the Wildspeaker builds, but probably not every single one of them. The Blind Prophet is next. It has 10% critical strike multiplier, which is fantastic. It also has 10% increased stealth, which most of the time is a nothing stat. Stealth is a very rare stat in PathOfExile 1, but what it does is it decreases the ability of monsters to detect you. If you have 100% increased stealth, so you go from baseline 100 to 200%, then monsters will only detect you when you're twice as close to them as normal. If you have 200% increased stealth, you need to be 3 times as close. So a monster would normally detect you at 12 meters, it'll detect you at 6 meters at 100% increased stealth, and it'll detect you at 4 meters at 200% increased stealth. The thing is that most builds in PathOfExile 1 are aiming to hit monsters before they get that close to them, and as a result, stealth ends up being somewhat of a nothing stat. That said, it will definitely have the odd occasional corner case where it's useful. Next we have the Servant of Arakaali, which has 13% increased chaos damage and minions deal 15% increased damage. Both of these stats are good, but chances are they're not good at the same time on your build, so realistically you're only getting one of these. And then after that we have the one that definitely has cooled off some interest in an Ascendancy. This is the Surfcaster, 5% chance to cause monsters to flee. This is an actively bad stat in many cases. The reason it's not terrible though is that the Surfcaster is going to be inflicting a lot of freezes, and often the chance to flee is going to wear off before the freeze does, or the monster's just going to die because the Surfcaster does have quite a lot of damage on it. On top of that, you have the nothing stat, 10% increased rarity of Fish Court. Or is it a nothing stat? Maybe we'll have to find out. Bog Shaman is next. This has two good mods on it. 7% increased chaos resistance, 5% increased effect of your curses. Both of these are individually very live, and this makes the Bog Shaman a more powerful package than we'd otherwise been expecting. I think that this is looking like a better Ascendancy now as a result of this. Now we have the Herald. Unfortunately, the Herald is in this awkward spot where the best build, as I see it from this Ascendancy, is going to be something that gets nothing out of these modifiers. So the best build for the Herald Ascendancy, in my opinion, is going to be Herald of Agony. Herald of Agony, the Herald skills deal 10% increased damage. This doesn't apply to minions that are created via the Herald, and also wouldn't be a very good stat on Herald of Agony even if it did. And 5% increased effect of Herald buffs on you just gives you a tiny bit of extra chance to poison, but you're probably already at 100% without it. Ultimately, I'm quite disappointed in this for the perspective of the build that I was thinking of with the Herald, but there will be other people who find ways to play a Herald that are going to use the Elemental Heralds, and these stats will be good in that case. That said, even if they are good for you, they're not outstanding. This is going to be one of the other ones where the Ascendancy feels a little bit weaker, now that we have those small nodes, and all of the other Ascendancies have gotten more there. Harbinger, 10% increased energy shield recharge rate, and 10% increased mana regeneration rate. This is going to be something most builds don't need, but the small number of builds that do, it's going to be really strong on. If you're looking to set up any sort of spellcast loop with the Harbinger, this is probably going to be valuable, but for most other builds, I don't think this Ascendancy's got all that much going for it now. The Polytheist comes next, and whilst this has an individually powerful mod on it, it comes with Light Radius, which is just a minor quality of life stat. The 5% increased global defenses, I don't think the Polytheist is the best spot for it. What that is, it's like having 5% increased armor, 5% increased evasion rating, 5% increased energy shield, and also 5% increased ward, all of them on the passive tree. Now, this is always beneficial. It's never bad, but I don't think the numbers are quite high enough on it. And chances are, if you're a Polytheist, you're only going to be speccing in a couple of these defenses. Ward is the hardest one to scale, and chances are this is not going to be scaling Ward because you don't really have any other synergies with Ward. However, keep this stat in mind because we're going to come back to it when we come to the Antiquarian. The Antiquarian gets more of this stat and is also an Ascendancy that's better equipped to use it, given that the Antiquarian has a number of things related to Ward. So the Polytheist crawls so the Antiquarian can run. Puppeteer is next. 7% chaos resistance is very welcome, but the big thing here, minions have 10% increased maximum life. This is fantastic for probably the best build for the Puppeteer, which is the one that's going to be deading all of those juicy zombies that you've raised that are now considered to be corpses. This is going to be fantastic. It's also going to be hilarious when people play this and monsters detonate dead your own zombies, which is going to happen, and it's going to be very messy when it does. Architect of Chaos has two fantastic mods on each Ascendancy node. 4% increased maximum life, this is already something that's fairly valuable. And then on top of that, 10% chance to gain an additional Vile Soul on kill. You're going to get this 4 times, and this is going to make your character quite a lot better. Behemoth is next. Behemoth is so bad that these mods don't count, but if you are determined to play a Behemoth anyway, 10% increased armor, 3% increased strength is no joke, but it's not enough, not close to enough to make up for how bad the Behemoth is. If this was 25% increased armor, 10% increased strength, I would still be advising you not to play a Behemoth, but it wouldn't be quite so embarrassingly bad. Ancestral Commander, 8% increased armor, 4% increased maximum life. Every time you get this, it's going to feel useful, but it's never going to feel overwhelmingly strong. And then we finish with probably the best of these, the Antiquarian, 10% increased global defenses. Now, this is already a good stat on any build, but the reason I wanted to call it out specifically on the Antiquarian is that you have this section here that is dedicated to ward. Gain ward equal to 50% of the armor and evasion rating from your equipped body armor. It's going to mean that your Antiquarian can have quite a lot of ward, because suddenly you're looking at getting 40% increased global defenses, but it's not even going to be 40%, it's going to be 50% because of the weirdness of the Antiquarian. Here, you don't really want any 4 of these points. You want all 3 of them that come off here. Kalguran Armor, Starlight Reflector, and Runic Tablet. You definitely take this cluster. But then with your last 2 points, you don't really want Lionized Hair. It adds a lot of pressure on your character to fix up the dexterity issues, and you definitely don't want Goliath Knuckle because it imposes a lot of other issues on your character. So what you want to do, almost certainly, is just take this small node and this small node. So you end up taking 5 small nodes, and that's going to mean 50% increased global defenses. On top of that, you also have 100% increased global defenses from Starlight Reflector. So you're looking at having 150% increased global defenses. This is going to make any flasks that provide flat armor or flat evasion phenomenal. It's going to make any ward sources that you've got on your character phenomenal. And it's also going to mean that if you want to experiment with the unique gloves Night Grip, fair warning, those things are pretty rare, then this is going to be the Ascendancy to do it on. Ultimately, that means you're going to want to have 5 small Ascendancy nodes on the Antiquarian. You might be wondering, can I take 6 of these? The answer is technically yes, but no, don't do it. It's going to end up with an overwhelming cost on the Antiquarian, and it's definitely going to end up with a weaker character. Anyways, that's the final news from Grinding Gear Games on the event. There is, however, one more thing I wanted to call to your attention, and that is a little bit of a player-run rivalry of sorts between 2 fairly informally set up groups. There is the Sanctum Runners Union and the Anti-Sanctum Alliance. Someone decided to post a bit of a joke that exploded on the PathOfExile subreddit, saying that they were going to organize a cabal of traders to buy every single Sanctum tome that came onto the market and delete them, and they called themselves the cabal of traders involved in this the Anti-Sanctum Alliance. In response to this, another group of players set up the Sanctum Runners Union to counter the Anti-Sanctum Alliance. This is going to be a little bit of fun. It's probably going to end up being a whole bunch of banter, and whilst I doubt that it's going to make anything from the Sanctum much rarer, it is potentially going to mean that those Sanctum tomes are going to be worth a little bit more than they've been in the past. It's also been funny watching everyone that's a PathOfExile personality taking some sort of side on the issue. As for me, I'm just going to sit in the background, setting the world on fire, and selling marshmallows to everyone involved. And I'm going to leave it there. May your idols recombinate in interesting ways.